Thank you, David. This is Chris Aldridge. I am the Director of Curriculum and Certification here at the School Improvement Network, and I am joined by Carrie Day, who is our Vice President of Learning.
We're so delighted that we could be here with you today, and we do apologize in advance for our catchy but somewhat crass title, but by the end of the presentation, hopefully you understand what we're talking about when we say professional learning doesn't have to suck. So I would like for each of you to just think about how many pennies you have handled over the course of your life. How many pennies have you touched, seen, observed, and just ponder that for a second. And then I'm going to show you representation of 10 pennies. And using the chat feature, I'd like you to respond and just pick out which of these pennies represents an actual penny. We'll give you just a minute to look at those.
To answer, just type in the letter that corresponds with which penny you think is the actual penny. No cheating. Don't reach into your pocket and get any pennies out. But take a look at these, and then in the question area in the webinar, type in which letter corresponds to an actual penny. All right, so we have one answer so far. Thanks. Keep going. Take a look at those and see if you can type in the answer area which one is an actual penny.
I actually passed one of those in the parking lot today.
All right, so a few of you are chiming in.
Interesting to see the responses. We want to give you just another minute or two here to get a few more responses. So we see some I's, some J's, E's. Okay, about 15 more seconds. Okay, Chris, if you go ahead and reveal the penny that represents the actual face of the penny, and it is letter I. So for those of you that picked I, congratulations. For those of you that didn't pick I, this is actually an interesting principle and introduces our topic today. So even though we have been exposed to pennies in many different situations throughout the course of our life, it didn't necessarily translate into us being able to actually, most people, it does not translate into them being able to actually identify the penny. And so a lot of times with professional learning, we think that exposure, sitting in a workshop, being exposed to education or concepts in education should automatically translate into learning, and then even further translating into practice in our schools and in our districts. And so one of our first points that we want to make is exposure does not necessarily translate into learning.
That's exactly right. We want to take people to the next level. We want them to be active participants in their learning. There's a couple of really important reasons for that. I'm going to share with you this quote. We actually use this quote in the description of our webinar today, but this comes from a study by McKinsey and Company in 2007. And what they did is they examined the best performing school systems in the world and came up with a set of principles for what sets those school systems apart. And one of the things that they discovered is that the learning engagement of the students will never exceed the learning engagement level of the teachers. Now, I've added the emphasis there with never exceeded, but think about that for just a minute. I think that's really true. The learning engagement of the students will never exceed the learning engagement of the teachers. So that means that as professional learning professionals, those of us that are in charge of helping teachers progress in their profession really have a responsibility to make professional learning as engaging as possible. So how do that? How do we take principles of engagement and apply them to professional learning to make it successful? Well, we're going to play a little game. I'm going to put up a couple of polls here, and for each statement that I put up in the webinar area, I want you to mark whether or not you think that particular item, particular statement is a fact, or if it sounds fishy. This is essentially like a true or false, right? Is it fact or is it fishy? So let me put up my first poll here.
And these, by the way, Chris, are I think these are common statements that I know certainly I've heard in my career as a former educator. So this would be really interesting.
All right, so here comes the very first poll. I'm going to launch it. And this is what it is. People learn better when they receive instruction in a form consistent with their learning style. So go ahead and vote if you think that item is fact or if you think it's fishy.
Okay, so far we have about half of you that have voted. There we go, it's going up. 3/4.
All right, great.
I think that's all we're going to get.
All right, I'm going to close this poll. And let me share the results. So for this particular poll, 100% of the people that voted said that that is a fact. So let me hide that. And I'm going to put up another poll. So here comes poll number 2. Poll number 2. Tell me if you think this is fact or fishy. People learn better when shown how to accomplish a task before trying to do so on their own. Go ahead and vote if you think that is fact or fishy.
We have a lot of fast voters.
We do, that's good. All right. Now let me close this poll, and I'm going to share the results with you. So for this one, 75% of you said that that was fishy. 25% of you said that that was fact. I've got just a couple more here. Let's go to the next one. The next poll is this question: fact or fishy? Consistency, meaning always learning in the same environment, for example, increases the ability to recall information. Fact or fishy? Consistency, such as always learning in the same environment, increases the ability to recall information.
I know my math teacher always said study math at 9 o'clock every day.
Oh, yeah. My math teacher never said that. So what do you think? Is that a fact or is it fishy? Excellent. I'm going to close the poll, and let me just share the results with you, what you thought. So as an audience, you said 92% of you said, nope, that's fishy. 8% said that is a fact. I've got 3 more. Let's see. All right, here's the next poll. Fact or fishy? Better long-term learning occurs when people focus their practice on one thing at a time. Better long-term learning occurs when people focus their practice on one thing at a time. Fact or fishy? Put in your vote. By the way, many of you have already voted. This isn't really about like multitasking necessarily, but you know, do I have to spend a lot of time practicing one thing and then go on to the next thing and so forth? How much dedicated time do I have to spend in order for long-term learning to occur? All right, so let me close the poll, and let's take a look at the results. So here are your results. 70% of you said that was fishy. 30% said that that was a fact.
We didn't get as many people vote on that.
No. Just a couple more here. Next poll. Tell me if you think this is fact or fishy. Learning lasts longer when it is easier. Fact or fishy? Give you just a few minutes to vote in. Learning lasts longer when it is easier. All right, excellent. Thank you all for voting. Let me show you the results. Here are the results. 100% of people said, nope, I think that's fishy. And for the very last one, oh, no, I'm going to close that one. We'll do that one later. Sorry. All right, so let's go back then to talking about those statements. So those are our 5 statements about whether a fact or fishy. Well, here's the answer actually to all of them. According to the latest research, the answer to all of those is fishy, including, believe it or not, the one about learning styles. Now, where do we get all that information from? How can we make that claim? Well, I'm going to share with you the source for that. And the source comes from a meta-study that was recently published. It was published in 2014 from Harvard University Press. And it's published in a book called Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. This is one of the sources that we use when we look at developing professional learning within our company that we offer to our clients. What are the principles that can guide us to make things sticky inside people's minds? Now, the statement that you're seeing here on the slide actually comes from the introduction of this book. And this is how they sum it up. They say, empirical research into how we learn and remember shows that much of what we take for gospel about how to learn turns out to be largely wasted effort. Let me repeat part of that. Much of what we take for gospel about how to learn turns out to be largely wasted effort, which is very interesting. There's some interesting things in this book. If you can get your hands on it, you can get it on Amazon and so forth, that you might want to take a look at. Some interesting things about, what does empirical research say about learning styles? What does empirical research say about actually presenting a problem to people before they have actually accomplished the learning? Of course, you never want to get people to the point where they get frustrated, but as you're designing really good learning, what are the principles that we can use about how people learn and apply that? Now I'm going to show you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples right inside our own product of Edivate. So I'm going to switch over to my web browser. Go ahead, Carrie.
I was going to say, as we introduce this, one of the things that we pride ourselves at School Improvement Network is that we are always learning as well. And so, as we continue to study the research and as we incorporate that into our practice, and this is what Chris is about to show you, we recognize that some of the things that we've done historically are invalidated by some of the newer research.
Certainly,
so,
we have learned how we can do things better.
Correct.
Right? We've learned how we can improve. And so I'm actually going to show you, this is going to be kind of an interesting thing to come to a company's webinar and see both the non-example and the real example in the same environment, but I'm going to go ahead and risk it and do that. Now, if you think about what is like the most frustrating, lowest of the low kinds of professional development that you might be asked to offer. What are the most frustrating ones that you might have to offer? And one of the ones that we find a lot of times that people are like, oh, it's so boring and it's so tedious, is when you have to do things like compliance training. So I'm going to use the example here of bloodborne pathogens. A lot of times in a lot of states, they require teachers every year. I remember when I myself was a teacher, every year we had to go through the bloodborne pathogens training with the school nurse, and it was, to be honest, in the times it was a little painful to have to get through. But it's very important kinds of concepts to know if you ever get confronted with having to deal with blood, and that happens in schools all the time. So I'm going to show you 2 examples. The first one I'm going to show you here comes from our video library. And again, you'll have to please forgive us because this is quite old. I'm going to pause it here for just a second. This video is quite old. This segment was produced about 7 or 8 years ago, so it's a little bit long in the tooth. But it's one that you would be typical of what you might see in a lot of e-learning environments. Now I know the sound isn't going to work exactly right, and I'm only going to show just a segment of this video so you can get an idea of what this video would look like. Now again, I know the sound isn't necessarily going to come through clearly, but just watch the video for just a second.
This segment of the Video Journal of Education is Bloodborne Pathogens, Introduction. As a professional educator, you may come across extraordinary circumstances in your day-to-day interactions with students. The information in this program is designed to inform and educate you should you find yourself in such a situation. In this program, we will be covering bloodborne pathogens, what they are, and where they are found.
All right, I'm going to stop it right there. You get an idea of what I'm talking about. This is the perfect example of the talking head, right? This is the talking head in front of, although it's done video, but in front of like a, yeah, it could be done live. It's a talking head in front of a PowerPoint. There's bullet points and so forth. And you know, in some circumstances, if that's all the time you have to prepare, I guess it's better than nothing. So our question is, how can we take something as mundane and sometimes, you know, as potentially boring as having to do bloodborne pathogens training, and how do we apply those principles that we talked about before? How do we apply the principles of learning and make it so that it's actually engaging, and more importantly, that by making it engaging, the people actually learn what we want them to learn? So I'm going to give you the other example to that. We took on the challenge of how could we design a better mousetrap in terms of bloodborne pathogens. And I'm going to give you just a couple of examples of what we came up with. So we created inside Edivate a bloodborne pathogens course. And rather than having everything be a talking head or even just passively reading things, we wanted to make it so that people would discover things on their own. They would discover them in such a way that would actually delight them as a learner and make it more sticky. So let me give you an example of that. I'm going to go here to section 1, and I'm going to take you to this activity we call Infect Bob. Now, part of the statute for all bloodborne pathogens training includes knowing how one becomes exposed to bloodborne pathogens. So we could make a little list of here are the ways that you can be exposed to bloodborne pathogens and let it go at that.
And the narrator could read through the list as the slide changes in the background.
Exactly. Or the talking head could read the list to you, and you know, the eyes roll in the back of your head and you're not going to remember it. But how do we get people to discover it? So we came up with this little Infect Bob here, and I'm going to put him center screen so you can see him. So this is our little Infect Bob. Now this is similar to what you might find in like an operation game. I don't know if you ever played that board game as a child, but here's the basic idea. You've got this virus here, and your job is to take that virus and see if you can figure out how to get it into Bob. How are you going to infect Bob? When I get the virus, I'm going to drag this. When I get the virus close to an entry point, you notice his little nose lights up, and I let go. And then the system tells me, oh yes, you did find one. One method of exposure, possible exposure to bloodborne pathogens, is by body piercings using non-sterile equipment. And so there's a little explanation of that. Let me take them off of that one. And then I'm going to find, now there's some things here that look pretty obvious, like why does he have a hypodermic needle in his arm? Sure enough, if I put the little virus over that area, his nose lights up, and I find out that the actual most common method for transmission is needle sticks. And so by discovering this on my own, by me having to, like if I even drag it to his eyes and his nose, the mucous membranes of the eyes, nose, and mouth are another method that bloodborne pathogens can be transmitted. By me having to do that, I'm discovering the actual ways in a meaningful way that's going to make sense to my brain, and that I'm going to remember. Oh yeah, I remember the needle stick. I remember the piece of glass in his foot, and so forth. And having to actually really hunt around and find those makes it so that the learning is effortful. If I have to put forth some effort and actively engage in it, I'm going to remember it a lot more long term. Just kind of as a side note to this, one of the people that works for us on our like proofreading staff actually had to go through this activity like 4 times before she found which was number 8. And so there's also this engagement of, oh, I didn't find them all, I need to try again, I want to find them all. Sort of some people call that gamification, right? Let me show you another example. I'm going to go to the preventing exposure area. And again, this is being presented with a problem. Actually, let me go back to a different area. I want to go to other protective measures. This is the example I wanted to show you. So the other principle here that we want to integrate is, how do I get people to try and figure out the answers even though I haven't necessarily given them the knowledge? By having people figure it out on their own, even if they get it incorrect at first, the actual answer is going to stick longer. So here is a series of containers, waste containers, a biohazard bag, a regular trash can, and a sharps container. And the purpose of this activity is for the participants to try and guess, if I have to throw this thing away, what is the appropriate container to throw it away in? So a soiled gown, like surgical gown. If I guess, and I say, oh, that could probably go in the regular trash, I get some feedback. Actually, no, a soiled gown should be disposed of in a biohazard labeled bag. Okay, so now I know. Then I get presented with the next one, broken glass. All right, well, I'm going to drag and drop that into the one I think it should be, which is the sharps container, and I get some feedback that it's correct. Now, one of the other principles that we use when we are developing training is we want to connect with people's emotions. When people connect with their emotions, and even if it's just mildly so, just a mild emotion, people are going to remember things better. The other principle that we apply across this is also making things unexpected. Now, I tell you all that introduction so that I can show you this next little part. So the next little part here is we have a campaign bumper sticker. Why would you, that has no meaning in the training except for 2 things. One is it gives a little bit of emotion. There's usually emotion tied to elections, right? There's a little bit of emotion, and it's totally unexpected, which helps you remember actually everything better. So I'm going to put the Trump bumper sticker in the regular trash can. Now, I'm not making any political statements here. Please don't misunderstand that. It's just that, okay, among the 3 disposal containers, that would be the correct one if I was going to get rid of a campaign bumper sticker, and so forth. Now, having said that, I've shown you a couple of interactive games here that make it so that people are actively watching and pursuing the knowledge themselves. Well, our company is known for video. We've done video for over 20 years. Does video still have a place in this? And the answer is absolutely it does. Let me give you an example. There are some things that video is really, really fantastic at. And so what we want to do is we want to use video for what video is good at and use other things for what might be better to present different types of information. So I'm going to go to this glove safety. And I'll just play this really quickly, just a little bit of it so you can see this. Here's a video.
Nitrile or latex gloves. The key is not to touch the outside of the glove with your bare skin. Remove the first glove by simply turning your hand palm up, then pinching the cup.
All right. So actually the demonstration of the way that something works, the way that an actual demonstration of the way that you would do something like removing latex or nitrile gloves is a great use of video. But just watching the video passively may not be enough. And so we've added another thing to reinforce that information. So here's another thing where the task here is I have to explain to somebody else what are the proper steps for removing a glove and what are the examples and non-examples. And so I'm going to take one of these and I'm going to drag this to the area that would tell me, let's see, touch the outside of the gloves only with the outside of a glove. That's good. I might put that there. So that's the first principle from the video that I had to learn. And so this is not only the presentation by the video, but there's also a follow-up activity that makes me do a couple of things here. One, I have to put the steps in order. And two, I have to discern what are the correct steps versus the steps that are non-examples. And so it makes me think a little bit deeper about the learning. And I get some instant feedback as to whether or not that item is in the right place. So think about other types of training. This is just an example that we used with bloodborne pathogens. But think about all the other types of things. We're developing training currently about personalized learning, classroom management, blended environments in classrooms, and so forth. And there's a lot of things that opens it up and allows us to do. Carrie, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's...
Okay. So we wanted to give you today a really quick example of the kinds of things that we're looking at as we develop our professional learning moving forward. We want to use those principles of learning, principles of engagement, so that the teachers are engaged and have really good examples that they can then use in their own classrooms, so that the engagement level of the students is equal to the engagement level of the teachers. We're going to pause and see if any of you have any questions you'd like to ask. Feel free to type those into the questions area.
While we're waiting for the first question, as Chris was talking about, these principles ultimately, he's talked a lot about engagement. He's talked a lot about delighting the learner. One of the other things that we're really about is effectiveness. It's one thing to sit through a training and end up being delighted or engaged, but if it ultimately doesn't translate into practice, then that's, we've still frustrated the whole purpose of the learning. And so one of the things that we consider very carefully in the design is how can we get the desired effect that we want, and what type of activity is it? Is it reading something? Is it asking them to produce something original? Is it having them, in the case of the video, sort things in order? So it really is a matter of picking what the outcome is, what is the competency, and then backwards mapping that and figuring out what is the best way that we can help the learner acquire that skill to be able to demonstrate that competence.
Absolutely, and that actually presents some interesting challenges as we develop our learning. And it's a challenges actually that we embrace, and that has really guided our best thinking to figure out how we can make it so that it is engaging, that it actually, and this is an interesting thing about the bloodborne pathogens example. The old video series inside Edivate would take an educator, I don't know, somewhere around 45 minutes, maybe an hour, to go through all of the segments that are included in that video series. And the new learning, with all of the activities and the interactivities and stuff, still only would take an educator approximately 45 minutes to an hour to complete. The difference, though, is what they get out of it, what they remember from it, and the fact that our biggest signpost, our biggest guide that we look for is how do we take these competencies and actually do what we need to do to change people's behavior, to change their practice, to improve what they do, in this case, in their classrooms, which provides an interesting challenge. So we have a couple of questions here. The first one is, there professional learning available in Edivate addressing classroom assessment? Actually, there are. We have a number of pieces of information about both summative and formative assessment. There are several segments about how to, even examples of teachers using different types of formative assessments and how they interpret the data and how that how that drives their instruction. So let me look at another question here. Provide a brief overview of the research, RE learning styles, and lack of empirical evidence to support the notion that we should cater to varying learning styles. Certainly, Karen, I'm going to point you to actually looking at the book and taking a look at the research. So the basis of what they're talking about in the empirical studies that were done is that it turns out that the best way to learn a task is what you're going to use that task for, not necessarily if someone is an auditory or visual or kinesthetic learner. It turns out that unless someone is born blind, we all learn more similarly than we do differently, according to the research. So we are all actually predominantly visual learners. And the point that they make, for example, is if I'm supposedly, I'm doing air quotes here, an auditory learner, could I learn to drive a car simply by listening to someone giving me the directions? So imagine somebody with their headphones on that says, now you're about to approach the intersection. Your foot is applying the brake. It actually would most likely be ineffectual if that's the only method that I got to learn to drive a car. Again, for the actual research itself, I would point you to take a look at that book. There are a couple of other books. There's another book by a professor, his name is Daniel Whittingham, who talks about the learning styles and the current empirical research about those. So the next question is, are you using engagement theory to inform your session? Well, we certainly hope so, Karen. That's one of the goals that we had. That's the reason we had the polls and the little thing about the pennies at the beginning, was to hopefully make it a little more engaging than passively just listening to our session. Thank you for that question. And then finally, we have another question. When will this type of learning experience be available in other Edivate courses? It's a great question, Jason. Thank you. We are turning out as many of these as we possibly can, as quickly as we can. The bloodborne pathogens example that we gave, where it was just a video, we produced that. It was a few years old, and that was one of the first ones we decided to tackle to see if we could, what we would do to make a change. Now, having said that, there are some video segments, actually there are hundreds of video segments in the system right now that are actually very, very good and actually really accomplish the goal that is set forth for learning, especially the ones where it demonstrates a teacher in the classroom and the techniques that the teacher is using, and actually gives the teacher an opportunity to reflect on through the reflection questions and apply that to their practice. We are targeting very specific kinds of things for the types of interactions that you saw. First and foremost, we'll be working on some personalized learning kinds of things and have those available to our users by back to school this coming school year. So thank you for your question. All right, that's the end of at least of the questions that we have right now in the queue. I'm going to ask Kerry if there's anything he wants to say to sum up.
Again, we're really excited about this. As Chris said, there's a lot of examples that we have done where these concepts have been applied historically, and so you're still going to see many of the same kinds of formats in terms of learning opportunities come out from School Improvement Network, but this is certainly a more enhanced version of some of the learning that we're doing, and as Chris indicated, we're being very selective in some of the topics, some things that may be a little bit more difficult to conceptualize, and of course we're continuing to marry those with excellent examples from master teachers in classrooms.
Absolutely, thank you. For all of you that have joined us today, we hope that this was informative about the things that we're going to be putting in Edivate in terms of our professional learning and our goal to make it so that professional learning doesn't have to suck. David, we'll give it back to you. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Chris and Carrie. That was wonderful. Again, if anybody has any additional questions, feel free to type them in right now. We'll take a few minutes and answer them. Again, this presentation will be available, and also the recording of the webinar will also be made available to you within 1 or 2 business days. And I do have a quick poll. If you don't mind filling it out really fast, that poll. Let's see.
Sorry, David, that may have been
my
fault. You may have to.
Let's see if I can make it happen again. Nope. Guess not. No poll today.
So sorry, David. I got carried away on the polls. That was my fault.
That's perfectly fine.
Have them type it in the question area. Just a 1 to 5 rating.
Sure, if you want to just include your feedback there, we'll say 1 is poor and 5 is fantastic. You can go ahead and let us know. If there's any more questions, please type those in. Otherwise, we appreciate your attendance today. Tomorrow, there's another webinar entitled, let's see, which one is this? It's Help, School Improvement Plans and School Improvement, Oh My, talking about turnaround and what school improvement and how their products can help with school turnaround. And if you're interested in registering for that link, I will add a link at the end of this webinar here. If there's no other questions, we want to thank you for joining with us today, and we appreciate your attendance. Thank you very much.